cases close, but some never rest. When silence screams, we listen. This is Dead and Wrong.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Liz,
And I'm Sam.
and this is Dead and Wrong, your weekly podcast about all things dead.
People, ghosts, animals, all of it. If it involves dead, we'll probably cover it.
Indeed. And tonight, I am just going to get right to the case. Let me start off by apologizing to everyone, including Sam. This is not an easy case. I almost decided to not do this case. And I actually had to step away from doing my notes because of how heartbreaking this case was. If you are listening to this episode and you just decide you can't listen to this episode or just don't want to, completely understand. Sam will have to listen to it though. So
Just for clarification, as soon as we popped on, Liz told me that I would have to take the headphones off and probably not listen to this. So if I am getting caution, I am giving everybody else a bigger caution. If you don't want to listen to anything to deal with kids and being very, very, very hurt, please don't listen and just come back to us on the next episode. Our feelings will not be hurt. Thank you.
they will not. So, Dead and Wrong presents episode 10, St. Louis Little Jane Doe. It is February 28th, 1983 in St. Louis, Missouri. Two men are rummaging through a vacant apartment building that is located at 5635 Clemens Avenue. This is a boarded up 3-story apartment building, which back then was known as Domi, which is home in Latin, and was located in the city's West End Cabana neighborhood. At the time, this area was not the best area to be living in, as it was known to be a hot spot for drug users and prostitution. Now, the two men inside the building were apparently looking for a piece of metal or some kind of pipe or bar that they could use to fix their car's timing chain. They were in the basement when one of them decided to light a cigarette, and when they flicked the lighter, that's when they spotted something in the corner. Upon closer inspection, they discovered it was a body, so they ran out of the building and immediately called 911. St. Louis is a bigger area, so there are multiple divisions of the police, and each one focuses on a select area. So for this area, it was patrolled by the 7th Division of the St. Louis Police Department. And when they arrived, they were met with a horrible situation all the way around. So before they even began looking at the body, they learned that the two men that called 911 were not even men. They were teenagers that lived literally 463 feet away from the building. They were 2 houses down. I watched a video where they spoke with some of the old detectives we're going to mention, and like this was laid out pictures of the neighborhood. The houses were literally 463 feet apart. The boys' names were Harris and Thompson. I do not have last names. I think due to the age, they just kept them at first names. And they were living at 5579 Clemens Avenue, which was exactly, like I said, 2 houses down. And when you would walk from their house to the apartment building, it took only 60 seconds. And they hadn't even actually been the ones to call 911. So, how I had said that originally it was 2 men looking for like metal for their car.
Mm-hmm.
So, they had gone into the vacant building looking for parts, but it was to repair their goat cart. It was February, but it was one of the warmer February days, so their family was hosting a neighborhood barbecue, and they had just wandered off as teenage boys do. When they realized what they were looking at, they took off running back to their house, telling the parents and the other adults what they had just come across. So they saw it and just took off back running, pretty much screaming to their parents that they just saw a dead body. Now, at first, the adults really didn't fully believe them. Teenage boys wandered off, suddenly they're coming back. But to be on the safe side, about 6 to 10 of the adults there decided to go and investigate. They found the body, so they knew the boys weren't lying, and when they began to dust off the leaves that were covering body to see if they could get more details, they saw something even more horrifying. The body was missing its head. So seeing this, the adults ran outside of the building and they called 911. From what they saw, some of these adults couldn't even bring themselves to speak about it, so they just separated themselves from the situation. So St. Louis Police Homicide Detective Joseph Burgoon was called and requested to come out to the scene. Detective Burgoon started working for the police department in 1960 and then worked homicide from 1969 to 1996. Detective Burgoon, along with Detective George Bender, who passed away in 2004, and their team arrived between 1:30 and 2 o'clock p.m. So the boys had found the body in like early afternoon, late morning. They said by the time everybody got involved to help with everything, between police and detectives, there were roughly 100 law enforcement on or around the scene to help. A lot of the police that were on scene were sent into the neighborhood to basically knock on doors and search for any kind of evidence, seeing if anyone knew of a missing person or had seen anything weird. So while doing all this, they kind of looked into the background of this apartment and they learned that it actually hadn't been vacant for too long. The last tenants had vacated the building in 1978, which was 5 years prior to this. The building was also not the only vacant building in the area. There were actually quite a few. So they believe that this body or this person would have stood out, but what the clothes she was wearing and the way that they described it, no one knew who she was, or like didn't stand out. So when Detective Burgoon went into the basement, he found retired homicide detective Stan Stakowski and Sergeant Herb Riley already on the scene. While Stan was retired, he was actively working for the medical examiner's office. So Riley and Stakowski made it clear that they were going to be the only ones to go into the room from this point forward to help preserve the crime scene until
That's good.
everything was good to go. And going down there and learning everything that they were actually going to be working with was a lot rougher than everyone thought. So the foundation of this building was built on stone. So the basement was stone. And they could see what was clearly dried streaks of blood all over the floor. So they could see the path that this woman was carried. The room she was located in was specifically the furnace room, so it was damp, it was wet, it was cold. There had been 3 rooms total in the basement. It was the storage, the furnace room, and then a third room, but they didn't go into detail about that third room. The furnace room was actually covered in dust, leaves, asbestos, and then like I said, it was cold, damp, and dark. So when Stakowski and Riley first got to the body, they could clearly tell it was an African American woman. She only had on a dirty yellow long sleeve sweater and her hands were tied behind her back with red and white nylon rope. And when they turned her over, they were all left horrified because it was clear this was the body of a child. And they were able to tell this right away because there were no signs of puberty. She was so young.
Oh my god.
And they even pointed out that her fingernails were painted red. Like little fingernails had red polish on them. She was a baby.
It's a baby.
So, seeing as the victim was officially identified as a child, the detectives from the juvenile division were called in. Detective Burgoon assumed since she was a child, she was probably already reported missing, and so while they were busy collecting everything from the crime scene, they were also starting to call all the surrounding agencies to see if she potentially matched the description of any missing girls. Sadly, though, there wasn't actually much evidence at the scene to collect. The main pieces of evidence were the sweater and the rope. Their sweater, they couldn't even tell what kind of sweater it was, like where it was from, because the tag was cut out. They tore this apartment building apart to try to find anything else, but they didn't. And this is where it gets rough. So on March 1st, 1983 at 8:30 in the morning, more details were revealed by Dr. Mary E. Case, who was the chief medical examiner. She did not do all this alone. She had called in a forensic anthropologist And this person was not explicitly named in the case. No clue who they were, names not mentioned anywhere, to help with the examination. So, with the forensic anthropologists on board, they were able to determine that this girl was approximately 8 to 11 years old. She weighed 60 pounds.
60 pounds?
Without her head, she stood at 4 feet 10 inches, and they believed at the time she was actually 5'3" or 5'4".
Oh, she was tall.
Well, upon further examination within the medical examiner's morgue, they changed her height to 4'9" or 5'0", because apparently if you...
Did you say 5'0" and just said 5 foot?
5 foot, you know what I mean. So apparently if you measure from the toe to the head, it's going to be different if you measure from the heel to the head. And
Yeah.
they believe that the original examination of her height was done from toe to head, and that made her taller.
Ah.
But they officially stated that she would have been no taller than 5 feet.
Okay. She's still
Dr.
tall.
Yeah. So Dr. Case then confirmed that Jane, which is how I'm going to be, she was officially ruled as Jane Doe, so that's how I'm going to be referring to her as. Dr. Case confirmed that Jane was sexually assaulted and a rape kit was done on her body. They found semen on her pubic area and within her body. They were able to locate a single white pubic hair on her body, but it was undetermined if the hair was from like contamination or from the killer. Because, I mean, anybody can put clothes on, and as disgusting as it is, they could have a pubic hair like on the inside of their pant leg. The only thing they even got from it is that it belonged to a white person. That's all they got from it. At this point in time, DNA testing was not really a thing. It was actually invented in 1984, and it was not used for an actual criminal investigation until 1986. So there wasn't really much they could do at the time with the semen. They also found that there was a tear of the posterior fasciata that was about 1.5 centimeters in length.
Hang on. What's a fasciata?
So this is what is known as the area between the vagina and the anus. They were also able to indicate that the vaginal wall had been ruptured during this process. And it was confirmed that this occurred before her death.
I don't like you, Liz.
I'm sorry, it gets worse. Dr. Case was able to determine it was a serrated knife with a long blade that was used to remove Jane's head from her body. The blade had cut through the bone and left several linear striation marks on the rest of the bone, along with a little bit of green paint, which they believe the paint came from like the handle blade, and they couldn't really do much with that. From the marks that were left on the bone, they were able to determine that her head was removed from the back forward, specifically a downward slant to the right. So the cut was from C3 of the spine to the front, approximately shoulder level.
For the love of it, please tell me that she was already passed before they decided to start doing this.
Yes, she was dead before the decapitation.
At least that was, I want to say good in some sake, but we shouldn't have to see that happening.
No. So on scene, it was determined that where her body was found was not where she was killed. This mainly had to do with the lack of blood in the area and the lack of blood in her body. There was bruising along the lower part of her neck, and that indicated she was strangled before her head was removed. Originally, they believed the strangulation occurred after she had already passed, but eventually it was determined the strangulation was the cause of her death. Whitish mold had appeared furry and feathery located around the body. This was specifically on her abdomen, the stump of her neck, and over the right anterior thigh. They measured it 1.5 to 2 centimeters in height. They did mention that this mold was not a common fungus that is isolated from humans or is considered a contaminant, so they believe that the knife used more than likely wasn't clean and the fungus came from the knife.
Wow.
Which they also believe some of the fungus more than likely came from the area she was dumped in. Due to the environment that she was in, there was wrinkling of her skin, which is a condition known as washerwoman. It is a syndrome that describes the change in skin condition that results from the skin being immersed in water. They just believe that it was so damp and that Jane had been there for a while, so the environmental conditions caused it. The conditions also potentially cause skin slippage, which is basically basically where the skin can literally slide off the body in one massive piece. And this was a major sign that Jane's body was in the stages of early decomposition.
This poor child.
So it gets worse.
I don't want to keep hearing that out of your mouth.
I'm
Liz.
sorry. We are almost done with the rough part, I promise. So there were also signs of further injury through the respiratory system. There was aspirated blood, meaning that blood had found its way into her lungs. And this is an indication something had happened to Jane's head. They believe that Jane suffered blunt force trauma to the head that caused fractures to the nasal bone and cartilage of the area. This caused the blood to go into her nasal passages and into her throat down her lungs. They were also able to locate blood in the lower passages of her bronchial tree, and this indicates that she was in fact injured before she passed away. So when you're injured and you are alive, you have all the blood that forms from it. If you had already passed away and then they did damage to the face, the blood wouldn't have gone all the way down because her body would have already been lacking blood.
It wouldn't be pumping, it wouldn't be circulating through the body to have it go into the different areas.
They also found blood in her stomach, which was the harrowing sign that she wasn't just injured, but she was brutalized before her death. And the target of this brutalization was specifically to the front of her face. So they believe before she died, she literally had her face beat.
This poor
I
freaking
know.
child. I hope that she was reborn into, like,
The best life.
yeah, like, the best life.
So
Oh my God.
the last part, Dr. Case pointed out how she was tied. So as I said, she was found with her hands tied behind her back. Her hands were tied so tightly behind her that it would have caused pressure against her ribs and her chest. Forensic experts today compare the way she was bound to how full-grown men are when they are handcuffed behind their backs and unable to breathe. As we've all seen over the news, full-grown men had died from this, and Jane was potentially only 8 going through this. They were able to confirm that the only thing that occurred after death was the decapitation. Everything else she was alive for. Hopefully unconscious. So hearing all these details and realizing what Jane had gone through, this inspired the detectives and police to search even more. And these police did so much. So all of the detectives were split up into smaller groups, and they took the time to call all of the schools of the surrounding area. Obviously, back then, they didn't really have the computerized system that we have today, so they had to call every school, describe the details of Jane that they had, and every time they were told that the school didn't have any matching students that matched her description or any students that were missing, they would have to call a different school. Once they ran out of schools in the surrounding area and then those within the whole state, they moved to Illinois because St. Louis was on the Illinois-Missouri border. They were hoping that maybe, they were lacking everything, lacking evidence, lacking information because Jane just had not been from Missouri. They even
She was
went
kidnapped and moved
across state lines. They even went as far as checking simply absentee records that maybe she had just been missing for a few days and wasn't considered missing. Within 7 months of them discovering Jane's body, they had every 8 to 11-year-old black girl accounted for in all of St. Louis City schools, both private and public. Like, that's how hard they were working. This team, they went for everything they could. They had an informant who had a long history of lying claim he had information. They knew he was probably bullshitting them, but they still checked. They couldn't risk this being true and them not doing everything. They listened when this informant said, "I know where her head is. It's in Waterloo, Illinois, hanging from a tree in this area." Sadly, but at the same time, thankfully, this was not the case. They never found anything, and he recanted his statement saying that he didn't really know anything. While he wouldn't admit his reasons why, he did get paid $600 for this information.
Why? He lied about her head being a damn tree. He should have had to pay $600.
Yeah. At one point, Paula Hawkins, who was a senator from Florida, reached out to them and informed them of a case they were working on. It involved a young boy named Adam Walsh, who had been abducted and brought down to Florida. They were kind of on the opposite end because they located his head but not his body.
Oh my God.
So they were thinking maybe the two cases were tied together. Sadly, these were two completely different cases that didn't have anything to do with each other. There are just apparently very, 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 very sick people in this world.
Yeah, that doesn't make you feel good,
No.
nor better.
No.
Or worse.
At one point, they were reached out to by a family within the neighborhood that Jane was located in. That apparently they had found a man who had a human skull on his mantle in his household. Police right away got a search warrant and they went to the house that was located 3 to 4 blocks away. And there was indeed a human skull on his mantle, but it wasn't hers. They were able to confirm that this man, who I believe at the time was in his young 20s, was from California, and I can't remember off the top of my head. It was either one of his science teachers or one of his history teachers gave it to him. He was going into some kind of education with human bones.
That said a lot.
I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. The captain at the time sent letters to all 50 states, multiple agencies within those states, hoping that they could get something, and even requested the FBI to assist them in any way possible. And sadly, all of this led to nothing. 9 months after Jane was found, the police chief finally allowed Jane to be buried. He had held off on the burial, hoping and praying her parents would show up and claim her. So he was holding off as long as possible. Jane Doe was buried in the Garden of Innocence section of Calvary Cemetery in St. Louis. Mary and Charles Schaefer donated a headstone for her that had engraved on it, "The saddened hearts were healed in knowing the pain in life is over and the beauty of the soul revealed." They owned a company where they made the headstones, and so they donated it for her. So while there were a few leads later on in the years to follow, most of them led to nothing. And the most promising one came from homicide detective Tom Carroll in 2005. Tom went to the state prison at Bonne Terre to visit a man known as Vernon Brown. Vernon was on death row for the strangulation of 9-year-old Janet Perkins in St. Louis in 1986. He was also on death row for a second case where he killed 19-year-old Sonetta Ford in St. Louis in 1985. Sonetta's head had been almost cleanly severed off by a large knife. I think it was barely holding on. And
So he has a, what do they call it?
It's not a motive.
Not a motive, not
No,
a
I'm
motive.
saying it's not a motive. I'm saying that to myself. He has a pattern.
A pattern. He has like a certain way he does things.
Vernon had also been charged for the killing of a 9-year-old girl in 1980 in Indiana. Before killing her, he tied her up, beat her, sexually assaulted her, and then strangled her to death. And the odd part was when Tom tried to talk to him about it, Vernon didn't say a single thing. He was described as cold and devoid of all emotion while Tom tried to talk to him.
Psychopath.
And Tom plainly claimed Vernon's thing was tying up little girls and killing them. And he was confident that Vernon was the killer. They believed that more than likely Jane had been the daughter of one of his girlfriends or wives at the time.
What?
Yeah. That's how he got access to her. And then, sadly, Vernon was executed by lethal injection on May 18th, 2005. I say
Did
sadly.
You say sadly?
No. Listen. I said sadly because they weren't able to get it from him. Like, he deserved to die, but I wish they would have had a little bit more time to look into him more.
Well,
but he deserved to die.
He got what he got. He got what he deserved.
He got what he got. I'm not saying he didn't deserve to die. I just wish they had been able to. If he had did it, if he had done the killing, I wish they would have had more time to get him to confess.
Do they? Well, can't they like exhume him and then DNA test?
Potentially, yes. I didn't really look into it because I got too upset and angry along with everything else, but apparently things were misplaced and missing when they went to go do further DNA testing, and they couldn't. So, as of April 22nd, 2026, which is the day we are recording this case is still cold. They have no confirmation of who did this to Jane, and they still have no clue who she is.
A thought popped in my head on it, and you said that he could have had access like from a spouse or a girlfriend of some sort, but I mean, what if she was um a part of the system?
She could have been. Personally, from what he has already done and the fact that he didn't even deny it, I personally think Vernon did do it. And I think it was his last big fuck you to the system.
Yeah.
That he probably knew who she was. He probably knew if she was in the system, what home they brought her from. If he knew, he probably could tell you what area they took her from, which if they knew where she was from, they would be able to indicate it more, even more. And
Mm-hmm.
I think he chose to sit there and say absolutely nothing and was like, fuck you, you're never gonna figure it out. Well, that was my very, very horrid case. As a reminder, we have socials. We have Facebook, Instagram, Spotify, YouTube, and Amazon. And if you'd like to email us any stories or request that we cover anything, our email is deadandwrongpodcast@gmail.com. I really don't want to say anything else because I would like to go to bed and forget about everything that I looked up, and I didn't put everything in there. I got to sit there and literally listen to both a doctor case and another forensic scientist that went over there and heard all of their descriptions.
All I'm gonna say is go hug your kids and hug your animals or your spouse and just feel loved.
Yes,
That was a hard one.
it was very
I
hard.
don't like you, Liz.
I'm not gonna do the next few cases are not gonna involve kids. I can't. I'm gonna take a break from children.
Thank you. That'd be great.
That is our case. I'm glad it wasn't a super long one, that I was able to keep it somewhat short. And that's all I have. I'm gonna go to bed now.
Ciao.
Good night.
Adios. Bye bye.